Thank you all for joining us today.
Good morning, everyone. I think I am kicking us off. I'm Morgan Gresham. I am at the University of South Florida. I'm on the St. Petersburg campus. And Sarah, if we can go to the next slide, I will provide us with a session overview. So we will talk very briefly about the history of the ABLE Task Force. We will learn a little bit about the principles. We will talk more specifically about the visibility of labor, especially with respect to care work. We will follow up with some case studies around visibility of labor with respect to care work. And then we will launch, finally, the mapping project for ePortfolios. So we're going to make visible that work by using a survey, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then we should have time for Q&A. If we can go on to the next slide, we have a slot for our materials today. So if you have linked to the slides, you can click that link there, which is also a tiny URL so that you can get all of the materials that we have available here. And I will just very quickly read that out so that it's in the transcript. The link is https://tiny.cc/AAEEBL22TF. If we can go on to the next slide. So we will be talking together some. So we have really sort of put at the fore some group agreements for a safe session. And that is, everybody is here to learn and challenge their preconceived notions and biases. We want to listen together without judgment. We want to be open to receive feedback. We want to discuss an argument, not a person, and we'll keep the details that people share in small groups confidential. And as Amy mentioned early on, if you want to remain anonymous, that is perfectly okay. We are going to ask folks to introduce yourselves if you feel comfortable doing so. We'd like to hear from you. Who are you? Your name and institution, why you're here, and how you are connected to ePortfolios. So again, there's the link to the slideshow if you'd like to join in on the slideshow. And we'll just take a minute if you are comfortable hearing from you. Who are you and what do you hope to get out of this session? Do feel free to unmute yourself, turn your camera on, and give us a brief introduction.
Hi, this is Kat Mahaffey. I'm not going to turn my camera on because it might really scare everyone off today, but I am so delighted to be here. I met these ladies at Computers and Writing, and this work is really wonderful. And this was the first introduction I had to it. And I had no idea that Amy is part of this group too, but you know, I'm going to get with her later. But yeah, so I am a teaching professor at UNC Charlotte. We've been doing ePortfolios, goodness gracious, I don't know, 15 years or so. And of course, we originally started with paper portfolios and then notebooks, and we had our carts that we drug around everywhere, you know, with the boatload of portfolios. But yeah, so I'm here because I am a digital ethics scholar. And so I'm very interested in online privacy and mostly in the tools and the content that students create and use for ePortfolios. And I'm really excited to hear where everyone else is and who they are.
Thanks, Kat. It's good to see you again. Someone else want to introduce yourself? I see we're having lots of introductions in the chat.
I can go. I'm Meg Smith. I'm a research assistant professor of digital humanities at Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville. And we are just getting ready to launch a new alternative gen ed pathway for students from underserved groups. And it's focused on transdisciplinary research. And so we are incorporating ePortfolios, but we're trying from the outset to make sure that we're accounting for all of the sort of ethical pitfalls. And so I'm excited to hear from everyone today.
Thanks, Meg. It's nice to meet you. Anyone else?
I can go. I'm Mike Householder. I'm a professor of English and director of undergraduate curriculum, and also director of the core curriculum at St. Catherine University in St. Paul, Minnesota. a Catholic women's liberal arts university. And we're looking at e-portfolios campus-wide, trying to look at all the ways that various programs are already using them and the ways in which other programs, including the core curriculum, the Gen Ed curriculum, can be using e-portfolios as a high impact practice for all undergraduate students at St. Kate's. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Hi, I'm Catherine Furlong. I am the Executive Director of Research Services and Digital Scholarship at Bucknell University, which is in central Pennsylvania and the Eastern time zone. So I will be turning off my camera because you don't need to see me eat my wonderful cheesy enchilada. You really don't need to watch that. I am part of our institution's AAC&U ePortfolio Institute team. Is that the right name for that? So we've been working on this for about 6 months. We started doing ePortfolios at the beginning of the last academic year, and we're looking for ideas and inspiration, and I'm always looking to do it with justice and equity and inclusion and all of those wonderful things in mind as well.
Thanks, Catherine. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
All right, we will go ahead and talk a little bit about what are e-portfolios, and you have probably seen these 5 C's of portfolio activities around, but we'll go through that again. The 5 C's of portfolio activities: create, students typically create, collect, curate, converse, and connect. And then as online environments where learners interact with ideas, with each other, and with multiple technologies, e-portfolios become critical spaces for the application of digital ethics. And so if we can go on to our next slide, what are digital ethics? And we will spend more time sort of digging into this once we start getting into the CareWork idea. But what are digital ethics? Because ethics refers to the ways groups and individuals relate to, treat, and resolve issues with each other. Digital ethics then encompasses how users and participants in online environments interact with each other and the technologies and the platforms used to engage each other and those things together. And so at this point, we will talk a little bit about how the task force came together. So I am going to hand it over to Megan to talk us through those aspects.
Thank you, Morgan. Hello, everyone. I'm Megan Buys. I'm the Director for ePortfolios and Digital Initiatives at Old Dominion University in Norfolk, Virginia, and I also teach in our English department. So shout out to everyone who said they were from English. And with that emphasis on digital ethics, the ABLE Digital Ethics Task Force came together about 4 years ago now through various conversations at previous ABLE annual meetings, in which we found that we were having the same conversations kind of over and over in different groups, and realizing that we were butting up against the same sorts of issues in various contexts, and that people had strategies they were developing, but that these were happening in isolation. And so anytime someone was new to our field or moving into a new position, they were alone at their institutions and trying to solve these problems that a community was working on together. And so we proposed the creation of a task force to generate a set of principles to try to identify these digital ethics issues and also consider strategies for resolving them. And as you can see from our lovely photos here, we've had an extensive group of folks who have been working through some of these issues together. And the team has changed each year, but you can see this previous year's task force of 2021, 2022. And I'd like to acknowledge my colleagues, Megan Haskins and Sarah Zerhelen, who are co-chairs for this past year alongside myself. And this is a team of brilliant folks who come from a diversity of backgrounds. Catherine, I see your reference in the chat about partners on campus. We always would love librarians to join us. So if you know any who are looking to join the team, you're going to hear this pitch throughout the conference that we would love for more folks to join to make sure we are capturing these from a variety of contexts. All right, Sarah, if you'd advance. And so we did. We came up with a number of principles. And I will tell you, we had very big eyes in the beginning. We came up with a list of like 23, and we thought, oh, yeah, we'll knock this out. Since then, we have reduced them, collapsed them, revised them, and each principle is listed and structured in certain ways. So we have a statement, which is an overview, a short overview. That's kind of the elevator pitch of what we think the principle is addressing. We then actually offer strategies that you could try to address this problem, because we think it's more important to have action than it is to just point at a problem. We need, as a community, to come up with ways that we might ethically address issues that portfolio work may result in. And then the next section in each principle is a scenario or a set of scenarios. So to help illustrate kind of what we're talking about with this problem, or how it might look for different stakeholders. How does this look from a student's point of view, a faculty member, an admin? So we offer these hypotheticals that also have strategies embedded. And then finally, we offer resources for each principle, because the issues are complex and nuanced. And even though they often overlap, they also have their own unique features. So some scholarship to ground those suggestions, always a good thing. And as you can see here, as I mentioned before, we have several principles in place, and we're currently revising many of these. It's an ongoing conversation because, as anyone who does digital humanities work knows, this stuff continually changes, and the pandemic did not stop that. We have seen a massive shift in what people are struggling with. And so you can see the list here. Our principles currently include a focus on practice, diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and decolonization, promoting awareness of portfolios, supporting portfolio work, visibility of labor, evaluation, accessibility, privacy issues, content storage, access to technology, respect for authors' rights and reuse permissions, cross-platform compatibility, and consent for data storage. And some of those are actually being revised at this time. And today, obviously, we're going to focus on the one that is near and dear to many folks' heart these days, I think, which is visibility of labor. Not to say the others aren't important, it's just the one that we think right now is quite timely. So if we could go to the next slide. And here is an example of one of those principles. You'll see at the top is our rationale, which I think in the new version, we're actually calling abstracts. And then underneath, we explain why that works. So I apologize for the sin of reading to you, but there's a lot of text on here, and I really want to emphasize what this principle is. So up top is our short statement, which is the labor required by students, educators, and administrators to create, develop, implement, support, and evaluate e-portfolios should be visible, sustainable, compensated where appropriate, and counted towards evaluation and advancement. And so our reasoning for that is that learning is invisible labor. Constant shifts in technology, strategies, rhetorical knowledge, technical skills, genres, and professional expectations requiring ongoing efforts by all stakeholders. The ability to develop, implement, create, support, and assess e-portfolios requires faculty and staff to have multidisciplinary expertise that should be recognized and rewarded by the institutions in which e-portfolio work takes place. In addition, the intellectual and affective labor and personal risk required of students to learn and employ new platforms, genres, and compositional practices when designing and creating e-portfolios should be recognized and rewarded. And we hope something like this principle is a community-supported document that you could take back to your institutions and say, the field agrees with me, the community agrees with me, this is what is recommended, and here are ways we can try to address the things that we're pointing at. And so with that said, I would like us to switch over to Sarah, who will show us how we might put a principle like this into action.
Thanks so much, Megan. Hi, everyone. So just really briefly, I want to talk about care work as one particular part of labor that goes into e-portfolio practice. that is often unseen and that we don't tend to think about a lot. So again, I have our abstract statement at the top, which Megan read to you on the last slide. I wanted to just briefly cover some features of care work. Historically, traditionally, care work is associated both with women's work in the home and with medical care work in that field, nursing work, CNA work. But the features of that expand to a lot of other places. And the ones I've listed here are the ones that I want us to think about, particularly in relation to ePortfolio practice. So care work is work that is done in support of or service to others. Because it plays a support or service role, it is often unpaid, inappropriately or uncompensated, unrewarded. Traditionally, it has been an incredibly gendered kind of work, very, very much associated with feminine labor. It is the labor that keeps the world running, right? It's the stuff that we don't see that actually makes sure that all the things that we do see work when we need them to. And because it is so unseen, and because it has historically and traditionally been done by people whose labor wasn't as valued as others, it's been very difficult to document as labor. So those might not at the outset immediately seem to connect directly to ePortfolio practice. If you're, just getting into it or just kind of thinking about it as another tool. But I want to just use a couple of quick examples here. So one example of care work from the student perspective would be if you had set aside a day in class for students to work on their portfolios, and one student is sitting next to another one and notices that their peer is struggling to format their photos or to add captions to those. Really, they could notice them struggling with anything, right? And they take the time away from their own work to go help their peer. And the care work that is involved in that is not just that they're taking this time and energy away from what they could be doing on their own portfolio. It's also the emotional labor involved in just recognizing that somebody else needed support. And that is a lot of what goes unseen in this moment. From the educator perspective, an example, and I don't think you'll mind this because she introduced herself to you all earlier, and I actually took this example from a conversation that we had at Computers and Writing. And it's an example of an educator who is expending their time and energy in like working with colleagues to insist that students have access to ethical platforms, and talking to colleagues about what digital ethics are and trying to help them be informed that some of the choices they might be making are not protecting students the way that they should be, right? And that is in no one's job description anywhere. And yet people who are working in ePortfolios are spending a lot of time doing that. And then really quickly, I want to also think about it from the technological perspective. And I was telling my colleagues as we were logging in today that I conjured computer issues today by writing this slide. But from the technological perspective, it's all the work that happens in the background that we literally do not notice until something doesn't work, right? So all the programs that are constantly running on our tech that just make things work, and when they don't, we're suddenly aware of them, could count as a type of care work. So, when something freezes, that's your sign, right? It's time to shut it down and let it restart. That is literally like taking the time to let your technology take care of itself in the way that it needs to. And so these are just a few very small examples of the ways that we can think of this one little tiny sliver of the larger labor question in terms of ePortfolio practice. So what I would like us to do now, this is one of our scenarios for the visibility of labor principle. And I'm just going to read it. And as I'm reading it, I would like you all to be thinking, where do you see care work in these efforts? And that might be like looking for where work is happening that might be easy to miss or to ignore. And potentially, if you're ready to think about it this way, to think about how it might be documented, how we might start to take note of this kind of work. So close your eyes and just imagine that you are an educator required to incorporate an ePortfolio element into your course design. To do so, you take part in professional development offered by the university, which provides time and space for you to become familiar with the critical underpinning of ePortfolio pedagogy, the technology involved, and the related instructional design components, such as assignment design, support, and evaluation. Your institution recognizes this additional effort by providing a certificate of completion, which your department considers in connection to promotion and other incentives. Furthermore, as you become more confident and proficient in your ePortfolio efforts, your department asks you to mentor educators new to the experience. Recognizing the time and emotional labor this might entail, you request that the department compensate you through mechanisms such as stipends or course releases. So now I'd like to just open it up. Feel free to put your responses in the chat or to unmute and offer them to everyone. Where do you notice care work here? Yes, Kat, absolutely. I think that this is a big, in writing this scenario, we were writing like the dream scenario, right? Like where people actually do see and value these things. And a significant amount is exactly what you're saying when your review committee fails to recognize the labor of the work that you're putting in. Yeah, care work involved in any professional development, the choice to seek out the professional development in the first place, the course design, absolutely. All of these are places that we want to highlight as aspects of our labor that often go ignored. And so that is essentially one of the things we're trying to highlight with this principle. And it is also something that we're trying to start to gather information about and to collect and catalog and be able to offer back to the ePortfolio community via the survey that we're going to share with all of you at the end of this session. And so now I'm going to move us. Oh, I went too far, didn't I? Yeah, so I'm going to just move us on really quickly for a second. I want to give us a few minutes. I will, sorry, I'm reading the chat as I'm speaking, which is probably a bad idea on my part. I want to give everybody a few minutes to answer these questions for yourself. And we're going to kind of move through some questions to start thinking about what ePortfolio labor looks like to you, because our larger question is what does it look like across the field, and how can we collect what those scenarios and situations are in a way that we can share them with each other and support this work across institutions. So I want to give everybody just 3 minutes, like real quick, and I'll bring us back at 12:30. If you would please write or just think about what constitutes ePortfolio work. What differentiates ePortfolio work from other forms of institutional labor? And what modes, strategies, or tools might we have for tracking the ePortfolio work that we do? So I'd like to bring us all back for just a moment. I think based on what I was reading in the chat, all of you have great ideas about what constitutes ePortfolio work. I'm really curious, when you started thinking about what differentiates ePortfolio work from other forms of institutional labor, what you thought about there, and maybe differentiates, but you may have also thought, oh, this is actually analogous to some other work that I do that is similarly ignored or not noticed, right? I think sometimes ignored maybe puts too much agency on it. A lot of times it's just things that go unnoticed accidentally. And then, but also maybe some of you have strategies and tools that you're using, and we'd love to hear about those as well. So I'd like to just open it up to your thoughts about those questions.
I'll go ahead and unmute to pick up on the comment made by Megan in the chat about ePortfolio work sitting at the nexus of competing agendas and varying understandings of what e-portfolios can do. And I think I would just, not that there's anything deficient about that, but I would chime in to also add that because the e-portfolio work, at least the way that we're thinking about it at our institution, is following the student rather than a particular program, department, or so on, that the work can, transcend boundaries of disciplines or departments or curricular and co-curricular or even institutional and outside the institution. And so anybody who, not only for the student, but for anyone who's working with the student, advising them, assessing their work and so on, they have to learn how to think across those boundaries with the students. And that often takes not only work, but it's sort of unrecognized work in learning how to do those things.
I think that is an outstanding point. I'm so glad you brought that up, Mike. That thinking across those boundaries is so critical to ePortfolio work. Gail, I saw that you had your hand up.
Yes, this is a really interesting thing for me. I feel torn sometimes because the work of ePortfolio, as they said, it's kind of TPAC. It's hitting at teaching and technology, pedagogical and content knowledge. In our society, we tend to give ourselves permission to treat technicians badly. And if you are a faculty member who's kind of working both on the pedagogy and on the technology, you can often find yourselves at the tip of the spear with people who feel like there should be people hired to do that, And I found that sometimes the pedagogy thing gets kind of overlooked. And the other thing is just the sheer resilience to have somebody say something really rude to you or dismissive, and to kind of have the eyes on the prize and not absorb it has been a big piece of the work for me in terms of helping my institution get to maybe different places.
Oh yeah, I think that is such an excellent point. I was just thinking about an email that I've rewritten 5 times in response to a comment. But the time that was put into that email to make sure that it was not as rude as the one that was sent.
Thank you so much for your question.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I really appreciate that. Emily, I'm sorry, somebody raised their hand. I think it was Emily.
Yeah. Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Yay. Okay, cool. Yes, to all of that. One thing that Mike's comment really reminded me of when it's following the student is just how longitudinal this work often is. I feel like instructors sometimes get frustrated when they go to a PD workshop that's like how to use breakout rooms in Zoom, and then they can do that. And then they feel like it's immediate, whereas there's a lot of frustration when it's a project that is both immediate in some ways, but also longitudinal in other ways. And there's, less visualization of what that outcome might look like at your local context or things like that. And so I feel like that is something that has definitely come up to differentiate ePortfolio work too.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. The temporality of it is so different from so much work that students do. Absolutely. I just want to thank all of you all. These were great comments and I think have really added to our list of ways that we think about ePortfolio labor in a variety of contexts. I'm going to move us to the next slide for the sake of time. And I'm going to try to. Yeah, and pass this to Morgan, who's going to take us through the next set of questions.
So in a very similar manner to what we just did, we'll take a couple of minutes here in just a second to think about who does ePortfolio labor, and you'll have a chance to do some free writing on your own, and then we will come back together to have some conversation around that. But the questions there are, who is doing the work of ePortfolios? who is supporting the work of ePortfolios and who benefits from ePortfolio work. And one of the things that always strikes me is, as a teacher, I'm always thinking about the student labor, but I think less about some of the other stakeholders involved in who is doing that labor around ePortfolios. So I'm not going to say more than that. I will give us the 3 minutes to sort of write down some of those ideas. But I think particularly in terms of who benefits and who does the support work. So if you would take 3 minutes, jot down your ideas, and then we'll come back together to talk through a little bit of that before we move on. Okay, so if you feel comfortable sharing some of your ideas about who is doing the work of ePortfolios. And one of the things that sort of strikes me is we are going to be asking folks who are taking the survey that we'll talk about in just a little bit, how they were trained to do this or how they got into working with ePortfolios. So if you would, when you talk through a little bit about the work, who is doing that work, how were you trained to do that work? Did you just happen into it? Were you just the techie in the room? How did that happen? But we'd love to hear from you a little bit about who does the labor of ePortfolios.
So I know I'm one of the presenters, but I do want to jump in here and talk about really quickly, like knowing that there are things like tutoring teams dedicated to ePortfolio support work, individuals in roles similar to mine who are faculty development oriented or instructional designers, librarians, individual faculty who are doing it because they think it's good, people who are tasked with it because their department went to a conference and heard about it and they just want EPs, things like that. And I really think that last question is so important in this framework of design justice, who benefits. And I promise I'm not a negative Nelly, but I just have seen various departments and programs look at ePortfolios as little more than a chance to market like diversity or take student work and market their program. And so I often think, who's really benefiting there? Is it the student or is it the institution? And how can we ensure that we're not just appropriating these representations of self for capitalistic reasons? I mean, I don't know that we ever can't, but can we lessen that harm? So I'll stop there.
Can I jump in with a quick observation? In our institution, it seems like we stop and start. And to your point, Megan, about making connections, I mean, it seems pretty obvious, but how do you even go about that? You can try and send out surveys and maybe you get 30% responding. I know our technology people, our career people very well, and I'll ask them, have you heard of anyone? And then maybe they know somebody, but that person stops and starts. So I don't know, if you're like, haven't really got started, I feel like we're in the negative zone all the time. I mean, how do you sort of even build up momentum to identify who is doing all this work to get a bigger picture?
I think Teresa's comments kind of lead to a nice segue into what Megan is about to talk about. So I'm going to push this because I'm very concerned about our time. And so I want to make sure that we have a chance to get to both Megan's questions and our survey coming up. Megan?
Thanks, Morgan. So actually, we're going to not pause on that slide, but just know they were phenomenal questions. You would have loved them. So you should absolutely look at our slide deck and we can copy them into the chat. But to the point that, Teresa set us up for so skillfully, going back to the original concept of the principles, we wanted these principles to be actionable things. Instead of just a community of scholars pointing at a problem and saying we should really do something about this. And so one of our first efforts as a task force is to try to show one strategy we think for making labor more visible. And that is our ePortfolio mapping project, which we are super excited about because we are literally launching it right now with you all. And you're going to hear a lot about this. And it is a survey that we are sharing out to higher education across North America to try to map in a more systemic way the labor of ePortfolio work at various institutions and contexts and at the individual level, because we get a lot of anecdotal evidence, but we don't have a great map of the field as it sits right now. And hopefully we run it again in a few years and how it changes in the future. So with that being said, I'm going to drop a link to our survey in the chat, and then I'm going to read to you our IRB approved script. So here we go. The ABLE Digital Ethics Task Force is conducting a research study to better understand and map the labor of ePortfolio work in higher education. This multi-institutional study aims to identify, compile, analyze, and facilitate activity and interest in ePortfolios in higher education by surveying ePortfolio practitioners and related professionals in the US and Canada. The project aims to identify the labor and common practices related to ePortfolio work in order to define an emerging field. Such work allows the ePortfolio community to better prepare new practitioners who may join the field, as well as more effectively advocate for resources and equity of compensation. We're inviting you to participate in this survey because you conduct work on ePortfolios. The survey is anonymous and will take about 20 minutes to complete. If you have questions about this study, please contact the study's co-principal investigators, Megan Mize and Sarah Zerhelen. If you would like to participate, follow the link to the survey provided at the end of this presentation and in the chat. If you have questions about your rights as a research participant, you may contact Tansy Vandekar-Burden, the head of Old Dominion University's IRB, and the study's co-principal investigators, Megan Mize and Sarah Zerhelen. And that is our official launch. We're so excited. And our hope is that the data that we collect will help us all as a community and as individuals so we can share back to you. And maybe you can then go to your institution and say, this is common practice. It is common practice for an institution at our size, at our stage, to have X, Y, and Z. And so it is our hope that this research actually is a benefit to all of you. And of course, you might even borrow our survey and try to do some of that internal mapping at your own institution and adapt it for your own. So yes, it's okay to share now. It's officially out there. Very excited. We hope you will take it. And if you know of peers who are doing ePortfolio work and you can be brand spanking new because you are capturing what it looks like to be brand spanking new in ePortfolio work, or you could be doing this for 50 years, which I don't know how, but maybe you have. We want you to. So we want everybody in here. Okay, and the next slide. And if you want to learn more, maybe we've whetted your appetite with this visibility of labor principle, and I hope so, because there are others. We have a whole webinar series that has been ongoing and we'll continue to do so, where each webinar looks really intently at one of these principles. We ask the community to give us feedback, to be a part of revising, making sure we address any gaps. Again, it goes back to that design justice. Any team will always have blind spots. So the next one is on visibility of labor. So if you didn't get to say enough today, we're having this conversation for a long time. There will be a one on accessibility in October and consent and privacy in December. Yes, all of the webinars are ABLE hosted, and you can see scholarship we've been producing on the principles here. And if you'll move forward, Morgan.
First, we unmute. That's helpful. And then we say, we would love to have your feedback on this presentation and then going forward on other things that you may attend associated with the principles. So if you would, there is a link there, and I'm going to read it out loud just so that we'll have it in the transcript. bit.ly/digital, DIGITAL, ethics, ETHICS feedback. So bit.ly/digital ethics feedback to please give us some feedback on this presentation, on ideas that you have regarding the principles, particularly the visibility of labor, because we do have that workshop coming up in August where we're speaking specifically more about care work and visibility of labor. And then just feedback on the principles in general. And I think we have one more slide that gives you our contact information. You can contact us individually, or you can contact us as a task force if you are interested in learning more about being on the task force, learning what the task force is doing, or if you have more generalized feedback that you'd like to give us. So again, please do get in touch. And I think we might maybe have a minute for questions. I see that folks are asking for a snippet to share the survey. I don't know what we have that might be quickly grabbable, but I do hope that we have something that we can get that out there, since folks seem to be excited about getting the survey up and running. Oh, there's something in the chat now. And again, I think we might have a minute or so for questions if anybody has a question. If you do have a question or a comment, feel free to just unmute. I can't see hands showing up right now.
Seems like maybe we're good.
Thank you all so much. You've given us so many resources and homework, some really important homework to contribute our stories and to share and get more involved in the Digital Ethics Task Force. If we could just take a moment to appreciate Sarah and Megan and Morgan and all of their labor and work on this topic. I do want to remind you that we will have sessions coming up after the brief break at the top of the hour. So please head back over to our program to see where you're going to go next. And I encourage you to reach out to these presenters with any further questions. Thank y'all.
Yeah, thank you all so much for your contributions. They were wonderful.